Is there a way of knowing through meditation what we are doing here in this life, what we are here to work on?
Yes, and in fact, that's a very good thing for you to do. When you get into this point consciousness state, one of the first questions you ought to ask is, what should I be doing? Am I doing the right thing? Am I learning? What do I, what's next? That kind of thing. Guidance is a good thing to ask for, and you will get it. You'll get that guidance. It may not come in a voice, it may come in intuition, it may come in something else, a sign, something that happens that you can interpret, and you won't know whether it's you or that or whatever, but just embrace it and go on and see what happens. See if it leads you to learning. But you can ask that question many different ways, and you can ask the question of, show me or help me find what it is I need to be doing, the way I need to grow, rather than tell me what it is. It's like, I'm open, I want to grow, I want to become love, this is something I want to embrace, help me. And you will probably get events that challenge you. When you say, help me, something may happen, and just like the dream, you're in a situation and you have to deal with it. Well, that's how it's helping you. It's giving you a challenging situation that is clearly something that will help you grow. And it'll only give you things that you can succeed. Giving somebody something they can't succeed is just creating frustration. So you'll always get something that's within your grasp, but you may have to stretch a bit for that grasp. Because if you don't stretch a bit for that grasp, you won't learn much either. We learn the most from the biggest challenges. The biggest challenges are difficult. If it's not very challenging, we don't learn very much. So we don't look at those challenges as, oh no, look what just happened to me. But welcome, I'll deal with this and I'll learn something. So see, it's a very positive way to embrace life and things that happen. And you see why that if you try to manipulate what happens up on the front end, you're just screwing up the process. You're messing up the process because you embrace what happens and then you deal with it. If you manipulate what happens, then it's an artificial reality. It's an artificial experience that you're having. It's all manipulated. And you lose some of the opportunity. So you'll learn more if you just let that happen and embrace whatever happens and deal with it in a way that helps you grow. That's a very positive approach to everything. And if you have that approach, then by definition, all these things that happen to you are opportunities, not tragedies or not things to be fixed. They're things to embrace and learn from. Already you're happy. See, already you're happier.
Ya es con verlo así, ya estarán más felices, serán más felices. Where does the concept of karma fit into your model? What do you think of the concept that nothing is random and everything is cause and effect?
Where does karma fit in?
¿En dónde entra el karma?
It depends on how you look at karma. If you look at karma in a very, very narrow way, no, I don't think that fits in very well. And by a narrow way, I say narrow in that I stepped on your foot, so then next time you'll have to step on my foot. I was angry and hit somebody, so the next life somebody will be angry and hit me. It's almost identical things. It's karma. It's you created this. You have to live that. That's too specific. The reality is not that well organized, and that wouldn't be efficient. Everybody learns in their own way, and the thing that's just perfect to help you learn is not that helpful for somebody else else to
puede no
learn.
ser muy
So
útil
the
para
system
que
gives
otra
you the
persona
stuff that you
aprenda.
need to
Entonces el
learn,
sistema
not
te da las
necessarily
cosas
the
que tú
stuff that is a
necesitas
mirror
aprender,
image of
no
what you've done.
necesariamente algo que es
That
un
would be
espejo, un
inefficient.
reflejo
Mirror
exacto
images
de lo
always
que tú
aren't the right
hiciste,
or the best
porque los
thing.
reflejos
So
exactos no siempre
karma
son
in
lo
that
más
sense
útil. Entonces el karma en ese
is something
sentido
that I don't
es algo que
agree with, or
que
I
yo no
don't
estoy de
see that it
acuerdo,
works that way. It's
o no
too
me parece que
inefficient,
funcione
too
así, me
simple.
parece demasiado simplista y
On the other hand,
por otro lado,
that you get what you need and deserve,
eso de que todos recibimos lo
now
que
it's a
necesitamos,
bigger view of
merecemos,
karma.
eso es una
You get what you
perspectiva,
need
un
and
enfoque
deserve.
mucho más amplio del karma, que
Absolutely.
recibimos lo que
That
merecemos,
happens.
por
That's the
supuesto,
way it is.
absolutamente, eso es lo que pasa.
What you need
Lo
to
que
grow,
necesitamos
that's the challenge.
para crecer,
It could be the
esos son los
pain,
retos,
it
puede
could be
ser
the
el
joy,
dolor,
but
puede
it's
ser la
what you
alegría
need to
también.
grow.
Pero es lo que sea
If
que
you can grow from
necesitemos
joy,
para
you'll
crecer.
get joy.
Si
If you can
podemos
grow from
crecer a
pain,
partir
you'll
de
get
las
pain.
alegrías, tendremos alegrías. Si
So
podemos crecer a
you
partir
get
de
what
los
you
dolores,
need,
recibiremos
and by
dolor.
deserve, I
Y
mean,
cuando me refiero a lo
you
que
deserve
merecemos,
in the sense that
es merecer en el sentido
you earned it.
de que te
You
lo
deserve it,
ganaste,
you've earned
lo
it.
mereces, te lo ganaste.
If you have a lot of ego and a lot of
Si tu ego
fear,
es muy grande, si tus
basically
miedos son
what you
muchos,
get is going to be involved with a lot of
básicamente
ego
lo que
and
vas a
fear
recibir
because
va a ser
that's where
mucho
you are.
involucramiento con el ego y
That's
los
kind of
temores, porque ese es
the
el punto en
lessons
el que estás.
you deserve
Esas
in
son
a
las
sense. I don't
lecciones
mean
que
deserve like
mereces,
punishment.
no
I
en
mean
el sentido
deserve
que
like
mereces como un
that's
castigo,
what you
sino merecer en
that
el
connects with
sentido de
you.
que, pues eso
That's
es lo
what
que
you
se
understand.
conecta contigo, eso es lo que se
If you
relaciona contigo y eso es lo que
if
entiendes.
you are a very loving soul, and
Si
very
eres un
gracious and
alma
very
muy
compassionate,
amorosa,
you probably
mucha
get
gracia,
lessons
muy
that you
compasivo,
deserve, which have to do
entonces
with
las
being
lecciones
loving
que
and
mereces tendrán
compassionate
que ver
and
probablemente
opportunities to
con
help
amor,
people and that kind of
oportunidades de
stuff.
ayudar a otras personas,
So,
compasión
you
y ese
do
tipo de cosas.
get what you need and deserve.
Entonces, sí
Everything that
recibimos siempre lo que
happens
necesitamos y lo que
is not
merecemos,
scripted.
pero
I think that
todo
was
lo
the
que
last
sucede no
part
es
of
como
that
parte de
question.
un guión, y creo que esa es la última parte de
It's
esa
not that
pregunta, o
it's
así es
just-
como la respondo.
Read me, tell me that, just the ending. I want to get the wording just
Volver a
right
leer
so I can
la
reply
última
to it right.
parte
Just the
solo
last
para poder,
part of the
la
question.
última parte de la pregunta, nada más
Again.
para poder pensar bien mis palabras. What do you think of the notion that nothing is random and that everything is causality, cause and effect?
Right. That nothing is random and
Que
everything
nada es
is
aleatorio y
causal.
todo es
Well,
causal. Muy bien.
Randomness
Pues la
is causal.
aleatoriedad es
You know, it's not
causal.
an either or.
No es que
Everything's
una cosa
causal in
se
the
pelea
sense
con la
that we
otra.
have a
Todo
rule
es
set.
causal en el
And the
sentido de
rule
que
set
tenemos un
determines
conjunto de reglas
how
y el
things
conjunto
work
de
here.
reglas determina cómo
So
funcionan las
there's
cosas aquí.
causality
Entonces existe la
there.
causalidad.
There's causality
Existe la causalidad.
in you get what you need and
En
deserve,
el
like we
sentido de
said.
que
There's a
todos tenemos
causality
lo que
there.
merecemos y lo que necesitamos.
But there's
Esa
also
causalidad.
randomness.
Pero también existe la
Everything
aleatoriedad.
isn't random,
La
but there is
aleatoriedad.
randomness. There's randomness, and when I say randomness, I
Cuando hablo
don't
de
mean
aleatoriedad no me refiero
mathematical randomness. I don't
a
mean
la
perfect
aleatoriedad
randomness.
matemática, no me refiero a la aleatoriedad.
When I say
pura.
randomness, I
Cuando yo
mean
hablo de lo aleatorio,
things that are
me
uncertain,
refiero a
things
cosas
that
que
don't
son
have any
inciertas,
cause
cosas que no
that you could
tienen
trace
ninguna
it to.
causa que podamos
I mean, there's a
rastrear.
cause in there someplace, but it's
Existe una
not
causa
really
en algún
traceable.
lugar, pero no
In
es
other
algo
words,
que
we all
podamos
interact with each other,
identificar,
and
es decir,
because
todos
there's
interactuamos
hundreds
unos
and
con
hundreds
otros,
of thousands of us
cientos y
interacting
cientos de miles
with
de
each other,
nosotros interactuando
stuff happens
los unos con los
that
otros,
nobody could
constantemente
predict.
suceden cosas,
And tracing that cause, they did something that caused that, which caused that, which caused that, which caused that, and 20 or 30 people later, it bumps into you.
después te rebotó
You
a
have
ti.
no idea where that started or how it got
No
there.
tenemos manera de saber
It's
cómo
just,
inició
that's
eso,
what I
de
mean
dónde
by things that
surgió.
are
A eso me
random,
refiero
things
con
that just
esto de que
happen
existe
because you
la
happen to
aleatoriedad,
be in that
que
place
pasan
at
cosas
that time.
porque
It just
resultó que estabas en
happens.
ese lugar, en ese
So
momento, y solo
that's the random
sucedió.
stuff. And there is a
Eso
lot of
es lo
that.
aleatorio. Y
Our
existen muchas cosas
existence here is
aleatorias.
not
Nuestra
tightly
existencia
scripted,
aquí no
for the
es
most
un
part.
guión. En su
Those
mayor
people for which it
parte.
is tightly scripted
Aquellas
are
personas
very exceptional.
que sí traen
They're
un
not
guión,
the norm.
no son la excepción,
Norm
no son la
is
regla.
that stuff
La
happens
regla
and we
es que
deal with
las
it.
cosas
There's
pasan y
lots of
nosotros
randomness in our
respondemos
life.
a ellas, lidiamos con ellas, hay mucha incertidumbre.
So, randomness
Entonces, bueno, la
is
aleatoriedad
part of the rule
sí
set.
es parte del conjunto de
The
reglas.
rule set has randomness
El
in
conjunto de
it.
reglas
Things
tiene
happen.
cosas
By that I mean the rule set
aleatorias,
sounds like
y con eso me refiero
deterministic,
a
but it's not.
que
Just like the way your biology, the way your cells work, the way
funcionan a nivel biológico,
at
nuestras
birth, the way the sperm and the egg go together and what comes out of that. There's all sorts of statistical possibilities. And all those possibilities,
estadísticas y todas
one thing comes out of that.
De todas esas posibilidades hay un solo resultado. Eso es aleatorio.
Now on the biological level, they say that's not random, you know, this, that, but how those things go, nobody knows. Yes, it's a biological process, but the result is not deterministic. Things happen in the moment that make differences, big differences in our lives, and we live with it. So even the rule set has a lot of uncertainty based in it.
How does the energy change in sex? In sex?
Well, there's sex and then there's sex.
Pues existe el sexo y después está el sexo.
Sex can be an expression of love.
Puede ser una expresión del amor.
And then there's an energy exchange,
intercambio
that
energético,
is not only wonderful, but
que no solo
at a
es
deep
maravilloso, sino
and
que
fundamental level.
A nivel profundo
but
y
then there's
fundamental.
sex
Pero también está
that
el
is
sexo
recreational,
que es
or
recreativo,
that is even forced, if you will.
Incluso existe el sexo forzado.
That does not have
y eso no
that.
Tiene,
it can have a very negative
puede
effect,
tener un efecto muy
very
negativo.
Unloving effect. It can be very ego-driven. It can be very need-driven. And there still may be a biological satisfaction, but there's not a spiritual satisfaction. There's a emptiness that follows something that has no spiritual content to it. So there is a change. There is a, there's always something, there's always a change, there's always a benefit to giving. And if the sexual acts are giving, then there's something learned and something gained and something wonderful. If the sex is focused on taking, then
y tomar,
you don't have that.
Pues entonces
it's
eso
more
no
of
existe.
Ego, fear-based.
Sencillamente
and then it just is. It is what it is. I mean, the biology is still the biology. It's still the biology still works, but the significance of that biology working is totally different.
Biología y cómo funciona es totalmente diferente.
Okay.
How do you interpret the concept of emptiness? Void or emptiness? How do you interpret that concept?
Well, I'll take that to mean the void and emptiness that you hear about in Eastern metaphysics.
Del que se habla en la metafísica de Oriente, yo supongo que eso es.
When I say that your meditation takes you to point consciousness, and that's a point of consciousness floating in the void, the emptiness, if you will. And that's just the sense of I am. That's all you get there.
Yo soy. Eso es lo único que se obtiene ahí.
That's a very good place to be.
Es un muy buen lugar.
That emptiness is a good place to rest. It's a good place to make the connection with the whole, feeling the connection with everyone else. So that void, sometimes it's called the plenum, sometimes the void, sometimes emptiness in Eastern philosophy. And it's a very nice place to visit. But I wouldn't make a career of just going there and being there. There's other things to learn.
No me quedaría ahí para siempre. Hay muchas otras cosas que
We
aprender.
learn through experience.
Aprendemos a través de la experiencia.
And we don't want our experience to be described by the word emptiness.
Quisiéramos que nuestras experiencias
we learn by embracing, and by being full of life, reaching out, connecting with people. Emptiness should not be our goal. Now, if you mean emptiness means getting rid of the fear and ego, yes, but that's not emptiness. That leaves you full. That leaves you full of love, so that's not empty. So I think emptiness in the sense that you're not busy, you're not not working on things, you're not processing, you're not analyzing, you're not judging. If you want to call that emptiness, then
entonces
you have to learn that. But I really don't call that emptiness. That's emptiness to me sounds like something's missing, rather than you've attained the goal of nothing. Attaining that goal of no thing, just point consciousness, that's a good doorway. It's a good place to start. It's a good place to rest, but it's not a good place to just hang out forever. You need to go on. That's not the end. That's just the beginning.
If time for people who die is not the same as for us, how can we communicate with our ancestors then?
Well, time doesn't have to be the same. When you communicate with your ancestors, you're communicating with the database. The database doesn't really have any sense of time. It doesn't change. It's just there. It's like a library. You go in a library and you can pick up a history book and read it. You can go to these databases and you can communicate with your ancestors. Everything your ancestors were, every thought, every feeling, everything they knew, all their fears, all their hopes, everything about them is accurate and there. And you can communicate with that. And as you communicate with that, you'll get an answer back. That answer will be perhaps in their voice, in their tone, with their knowledge. But what's answering you is the larger consciousness system. Your ancestors are a part of that system, as are you. We have to not think of ourselves as being so separate. Well, there's the larger conscious system, and here's me, and over there are the ancestors, and it's all separate things in separate places. That's the wrong concept. We're all part of the same thing. The ancestors are part of the same system that we are part of that same system. We communicate, and when I say, well, it's the larger conscious system is communicating, you think, well, that's not my ancestor. Well, yes, it is. The larger consciousness system has all that data that defines your ancestors and who and what they are and why they did what they did and what their hopes and dreams were. And that can be communicated to you through the larger consciousness system. That does not mean your ancestors are still fighting the same battles and doing whatever it is they did. This is a historical database. It's just there. And you can communicate with it. And you can have conversation, interaction with it. Okay.
For how long do you remember your past incarnation?
I have at times, particularly years ago, when I was kind of new to this and was just learning. Like most of you, I was kind of, see what the past lives are, it'd be fun, out of body would be a lot of fun, and I had those same kinds of attractors to me, so I did look at some of those things, and I know some of the people I've been, and the things that I've done, whatever, but I haven't done that for years and years, because it just isn't that significant, just isn't that important. Here I am in the present. I evolve by making good choices based on what happens to me. My ancestors it's past history. Those lives that I lived and what I did. They're kind of interesting in an entertaining way, and you can maybe learn a few things, particularly if you've got a particular issue that's related there. But otherwise, it's more of an ego interest than it is a necessary thing to do. So it's
pues,
you know, past lives,
las
go
vidas
play.
pasadas, bueno, vayan,
But
jueguen,
it's not really going to become an important part of your
pero no
life.
es algo que será una
And you
parte
don't need to
importante
go
de sus
visit a
vidas.
past life
No
to have
necesitan ir a
communication.
visitar sus
And
vidas
you can
pasadas para
communicate
establecer comunicación.
and get all
Pueden
the things,
comunicarse y obtener todas
if you
las
communicate
cosas.
directly with the
Si
larger
se
conscious
comunican
system, or
directamente con el
you
sistema de
communicate with an
conciencia más amplio, o si
ancestor
se
or whatever, it's
comunican
all
con
the
sus
same
ancestros
thing.
o
It's
lo que
all
sea,
got the same
todo es
knowledge
parte de lo
base,
mismo,
see?
es la misma
Just
base de
ask
datos de
the specific
conocimiento.
question you
Solamente
need.
hagan una pregunta
And if
específica
it being your
que ustedes
ancestor
necesiten.
makes you
Y
feel more
si sus
comfortable with it,
ancestros los hacen sentir
and
más
makes you
cómodos
more
al recibir esa
at
respuesta,
ease
ese
with it,
mensaje, y se sienten
then
más
let it be your
cómodos escuchando
ancestor.
los de ellos, pues entonces
But
que
it
sean
doesn't
sus
have to be.
ancestros los que
The
se lo
same
digan. Pero no
information
tiene que
is
ser
available
ellos,
just
la
for
misma
the asking
información está
with
disponible
an
ahí
intent.
sencillamente preguntando con una intención.
So I don't do a lot of that.
Entonces, pues yo no
I
hago
can probably point to the last couple of incarnations,
trabajo,
but
puedo hablar a lo
because
mejor de mi
those
último
people
par
are
de
probably
encarnaciones,
known, I
porque
just
esas
as soon not
personas
talk
tal
about it
vez
because then
eran
it starts
conocidas, no
another
debería yo
whole
hablar
bunch
de
of
eso
stuff,
porque
and it's all
eso
part of the ego and intellect, and it
empieza
doesn't
a
really amount
llevarnos
to
a toda
anything,
una
and it's
parte y
not going
tiene
to
que ver
help
con el ego y el
anybody. It's
intelecto
more
y
gee
no,
whiz.
eso no le va a
You
ayudar
know,
a
there's
nadie.
this saying that says,
No es interesante.
what is it? An inquiring mind wants to
Una
know.
mente
Right. You
curiosa
see them on
quiere
billboards
saber, así se
sometimes,
dice, ¿no?
advertising about schools
Y son
and education. An
normalmente
inquiring
vemos en la
mind,
publicidad que hay que
wants to
ser
know.
curiosos, hay que
Well, I've
tener
changed that a
mentes
little bit,
curiosas. Eso
and I
yo lo he
say
cambiado
an
un poquito.
inquiring
Y
ego
solamente un
wants
ego
to know.
curioso quiere
A lot of
saber.
information we just
Mucha
want to know because
información que
we're
solamente
entertained
queremos
by
saber
it. It
porque nos
interests
parece
us.
entretenido,
It's
porque
kind of a
es
gee whiz sort of
interesante.
thing.
Es como
Aren't
saber
you
datos
curious?
curiosos. ¿No te da curiosidad
But the
saber
curiosity
esto?
is more an
La
entertainment,
curiosidad es un
and it's just not
entretenimiento,
that
¿no?
useful.
No es algo muy
So
útil.
I generate a lot more ego,
Entonces, lo único que
interest
hago
in
es generar
entertainment
más
by
ego,
talking about those
interés,
kinds of things. So I generally
entretenimiento,
don't
hablando de
because they're
esas
really not
cosas,
very useful.
porque no son muy útiles.
That's to keep the next question from being, oh, well, then who were those people?
Para evitar que la
Because
siguiente
now we're off the
pregunta
track of
sea,
things that are
¿y quiénes
significant
eran
and on
esas
the track to
personas?
things that are
Vamos a hablar de lo
just playing
significativo,
around, and I'd
cosas
rather
que no
talk
sean
about
nada
things
más jugar. Me
significant.
gustaría hablar de cosas que sean más valiosas. When I am very positive, I feel that sometimes I can be a conformist, and is that a good thing?
Well, conformist or not conformist isn't the issue.
Ser conformista o no
The issue
realmente no
is
es el punto.
what is your
El
intent?
punto es cuál es tu intención.
Okay, if the right choice, if your
Si la
intent is
decisión
yours,
correcta, si tu intención
and it's what you want to
es
do, and
tuya,
it's
y
what
eso
you
es lo que
think is
quieres
best,
hacer,
and
y
it
eso es lo
happens
que
to be
crees que
what
es lo mejor,
most
y
other
resulta
people are
ser que
doing
es
and
lo
what they
que la
think
mayor parte
best,
de las personas están
that's
haciendo y
fine.
consideran que es lo
If,
correcto, está
however,
bien. Pero
you're doing
si
what everybody else is
están
doing
haciendo lo
because
que
you
están
think
haciendo
that's
todos los
safe,
demás porque
and it's
creen que
not
eso es
really
lo
your
seguro,
choice,
y realmente
then you're
eso no es
abdicating
lo
your
que
choice.
es su decisión,
That kind
lo
of
que están haciendo
conformity
es dejar
is
ir
not
su propia
good.
decisión, y ese tipo
So
de
just going
conformismo
along
no
with the
es
crowd because the
correcto.
crowd's there and the crowd's
Seguir lo que
safe
todo el
and the
mundo
crowd
hace porque
defines
lo
your
hace todo el
peers
mundo y
and
eso
might
lo
laugh
hace
at you if you don't do
seguro,
just what
y
they
a lo
do.
mejor si uno hace otra cosa
That's
se
not
siente que los
good.
demás
That's
se
you
burlan
giving
de
up
ti.
your
Eso no está bien,
authenticity
eso es
to the crowd
entregar tu
to conform.
autenticidad
But
a la masa.
You shouldn't
solo
feel
para
bad at
ser
all that if
conformista.
you're making your own
Pero no debes
decisions
sentirte mal
and
si
you're
al
doing
tomar tus
things
propias
because you think those are the
decisiones,
best
al
things
hacer
to
cosas
do,
que consideras
and other
que
people are
son
doing it
las
too,
correctas,
so
otras
you're doing the
personas
same
también
thing
lo
they
están
are,
haciendo, y resulta que estás
that's
haciendo
sort
lo
of you're
mismo que
conforming
ellos,
to what they're
pues,
doing, but
está
it's
bien,
your
estás
choice.
siendo conformista con
That's
lo que ellos
fine.
hacen, pero
So
es tu
it's
decisión
more
y está bien.
a matter of
Entonces
intent
tiene
and
que
where your
ver
choice
mucho
is
más con
coming from.
intención y
Are
de
you
dónde
copying
surgen tus
or are you
decisiones. ¿Estás
leading?
copiando
Are you marching to your
o
own
estás
beat or are you marching
o
to
estás
somebody
siguiendo
else's?
tu propio
You'll
ritmo,
always
estás siguiendo
learn
tu propio
more if
flujo,
you march to your own.
porque
Be
siempre vamos a
authentic.
aprender más al ser auténticos, al seguir nuestro propio ritmo.
¿Cómo puedes empezar a practicar
How can you
la telepatía?
start practicing telepathy?
Well, the key to
La
receiving
clave para
telepathic
recibir
communications
comunicaciones telepáticas
is to listen
es escuchar
and really listen,
y
be
realmente
open.
escuchar, estar abiertos.
Okay. What we normally do
Lo que normalmente
is we'll maybe
hacemos
ask a question,
es que
we'll have a
probablemente hacemos una
thing and we're
pregunta
get a telepathic
y vamos a recibir
answer
una
back.
respuesta
And as soon as we ask the
pero
question, we
apenas
start
hacemos la pregunta
anticipating
empezamos a
an
anticiparnos
answer.
empezamos a anticipar
And
la
that anticipation of an answer starts to give us expectations.
Nos empieza a generar expectativas.
And those expectations just get in the way of ever getting any kind of answer at all.
La capacidad que tengamos de recibir esa
What you do when you are communicating with non-physical things is you just put out the question with a strong intent. Strong intent might mean you have to start from a good meditation state to get a good focused intent, and then you open yourself and wait and see what happens with no expectations, no thoughts about whether you'll get anything or not. You don't feel like if I don't get anything, I failed. That's not a failure. You just may not get anything. Ask again. If you ask 2 or 3 times, try asking in a different way. You may be asking it in a way that it's hard to answer. You may be asking in a way that's too complicated. Ask your questions in a way where a simple answer works. Okay, ask fundamental things, not things, should I wear red shoelaces or green shoelaces? Things like that. You won't get any answers. Nobody really cares about that decision. Ask fundamental things about you and your growth, and then just open yourself up and wait for something. Maybe it'll just be an image. Maybe it'll just be a sense of knowing. And then don't immediately say, well, was that me or did I just make that up? Just embrace it. Go with it. And do it again. And maybe ask for a little more detail. Well, how does that apply to this? Does that mean that I should get the conversation going? And did you lose?
No, it's
everything
okay.
All right?
It's okay.
We're still?
Yeah.
Okay. I can't see over there very well because somebody's shining lights in my eyes.
Right.
So that's why I'm missing the thumbs up or whatever.
It's okay.
Okay. Now there's another way that you can have telepathic communications, and that is if you're tuned to people, if you're tuned into people and you're very empathetic, and I mean tuned in a loving way, you can share their thoughts. You can hear them thinking. Now you might say that's invading their privacy, and it is if you're just an eavesdropper. Oh, I wonder what he's thinking, she's thinking. Then that's not in love, that's ego. But if you're connected with individuals empathetically, you can hear their thinking. You get their thoughts. And some people think very loudly. You almost can't help but hear what they're thinking because they think so loudly. And it's just a matter of tuning in. And that telepathy generally comes out like language because they're thinking in terms of language. You also can taste what they taste and feel what they feel. It's the old Vulcan mind meld, whatever. You just kind of become one with them. Well, we're all one thing, we're all together. You can just unite, become one with somebody, feel their feelings, think their thoughts. That's actually a useful thing to do, particularly with people you're not getting along with, because you can maybe solve the problem. Where's that tension coming from? Why are they so upset? And often if you stand in their shoes, you get a whole different perspective of what's going on. It's not at all like you thought from your shoes, but from their shoes, suddenly you kind of see where they're coming from, and now it's not so awful at all. You see exactly where they are, so sometimes that's very helpful. But if you do it in the sense of eavesdropping, it's not good. That's ego. That's manipulation. If you do it in the sense of love and caring, that this will be helpful, then there's no problem there.
Con un sentido de ayuda, pues entonces no habrá ningún problema.
All right.
Tom, could you summarize what you call the fundamental process? And with that in mind, I have two more questions. The first one is economic recessions, political crises, natural disasters that affect great numbers of people. Are they ways of social entropy? Are they types of social entropy? And the second question is diseases or illnesses, accidents, or personal, professional failures, are they ways of individual entropy? Are there types of individual entropy?
First of all, we'll talk about fundamental process, what it is. Fundamental process is my name for evolution. Evolution is a fundamental process. Anything that changes with a purpose, there's some purpose to it, something driving it, some goal for it. If there's a purpose, and if the thing is changeable, if it changes, particularly if it's self-aware, then, well, it doesn't have to be self-aware, but it speeds the process up if it is. Then evolution will work on that thing. Okay? And the way evolution works, it's very fundamental. You know, political systems evolve, technology evolves. All of our technology, every piece of it is evolved from the piece before it. And the piece before that, the understanding before that, all of it is an understanding and a capability that evolves. Nobody is carving in stone and then the next week produces a color TV. You know, that would skip the evolutionary process. You have to go through step by step by step by step. Our evolution with our consciousness is like that. You don't just go, aha, and become, enlightened. It usually doesn't work that way. Now you can make big jumps, and some people do, but they're the exception rather than the rule. And they make those big jumps because they put in an awful lot of work up front. And all of that work up front hasn't quite gelled or come together. There's some pieces missing that aren't quite there yet, and then they get that piece and aha, then they can get maybe a jump. But that jump wasn't just out of the blue. That jump was because of a lot of preparation that came up in front of it, that evolved along to a point where it was ready to put things together. So evolution is fundamental. Our culture evolves, our monetary systems evolve, our economy evolves. Evolution means things change, and they change, and if the change is helpful to its purpose, then it stays. If it's not helpful, if it's hurtful to its purpose, it eventually dies out and goes away. And that's all it is to it. It's just that simple process. Our reality is what I call a process fractal. The process is evolution. So you take evolution, things evolve, you get an input, it's what you started with, you evolve, and you get an output, and then that output gets fed back into evolution, which changes it, and you get an output, and that output evolves more. So you see it's just this continuous, the output becomes the input for the next cycle of evolution. That's how it works, and that's an extremely fundamental process. There's another word for evolution that's become modernized. What is that? It's another word escapes me. It's basically if you have a potential, maybe it'll come to me as I talk. If you have a potential for something to happen, just a potential, eventually that potential will change states. For whatever reasons, it's a complex system. You get a change in state. And that change in state, if it's effective, will maybe change again. And spontaneously, out of nothing, you end up with structure, or you end up with something. And they've tested this with like molecules and things, where they just kind of have a sea, a random bunch of stuff, and they let them go. And eventually, something starts to build in it. And it's the same sort of thing. anything that can change will change, and eventually, just by random luck, it'll change in a way that is more stable, more productive, takes you closer to the goal, and those things then will grow further and grow further. So, I can't think of that. Emergent, what is it? It's emergent. Emergent complexity, something like that. It was discovered about 10 years ago, became a big buzzword, and then kind of went away. It's just another way of saying evolution. I think it was emergent complexity. Take simple systems and they would build complex systems all by themselves. Do evolution. So that was the first part of the question. What is evolution? It's just change. And it may be random change. Random things just happen. And if they're good things, they continue. If they're dysfunctional things, they go away. Or it can be guided change. Now, we humans are at a point where we can start modifying our own biological evolution. Right? We can splice genes. We can take genes from this organism and put them in that organism. We can clone. We can do lots of things that affect our biological evolution. And we can do it purposely. We don't have to wait for some kind of mutation to create something and then for the system to decide whether that's good or bad and it dies or goes forward. We can actually modify the system and the environment as well as modify the genetic material. So in that way, evolution can be very intentional. Or it can be a subset of the system. Like our financial system evolves. Money evolves. Okay, what was the other part? There was two other parts of that question.
Yeah, if
a natural disaster that affects a group of people, is it a type of social entropy? And then on an individual level also, for instance, a disease or an accident, or could that be a type of individual entropy?
Yeah. I think what you mean by a type of social entropy is, are those natural phenomena interacted or nudged or made to happen or not to happen because of what's going on with people and their consciousness and their ideas and their love and their fear and all that kind of stuff? Is it all interconnected? And the answer is yes. It is all interconnected. And the way that it's all interconnected is that the larger consciousness system is really in charge. It's a virtual reality, and it can pretty well do what it pleases. So, as we become dysfunctional, as our social systems become very dysfunctional, it may be that some of our natural systems might create challenges to challenge that dysfunction. And it might even that some of our natural systems will destroy some of that dysfunction. As we become functional and things are working, and let's say there was a natural rule set based destruction, earthquake, say, big problem like that, that would kind of mess up our game. We're finally getting it together. The evolution's doing well, the love is building. That's not a good time to have a major disaster, perhaps. Now, maybe a major disaster would even make us more loving and caring and empathetic with the people having trouble, or maybe it would distract us. The system can look at that and say, what's the best thing? And because it runs the simulation, it can always quiet down that. It can bleed off some of that tectonic pressure or whatever. It does it in the margins where nobody notices. The system can't just come in and manipulate stuff. It has to be done where there's enough uncertainty that it doesn't, it never shows that it's ever done. Otherwise, it would be modifying our reality, making it inconsistent. So yes, there can be connections between our thoughts and our state of development and the natural world. But it's not necessarily a one-to-one. Now our thoughts, people can learn how to make clouds come and go. Well, if you can make clouds come and go, maybe you can control the weather somewhat with your intent, because there's a lot of randomness in where the moisture is in the water, and if you can pull that together, you might make it rain, you see. That's not impossible to do. That's an intent modifying physical reality. There's lots of randomness. So there's those kinds of connections. But it's not the case necessarily that a whole bunch of people get upset and angry that there's going to be a flood or there's going to be a, some kind of natural disaster to mirror that. There's not a one-to-one connection, but they can be connected. With disease and illness, we create a lot of disease and illness by our thoughts. So yes, if we're in a very dysfunctional environment where we think very dysfunctionally and there's lots of stress, we will create lots of disease from that. So our minds are very much connected to our health. Speaking of which, I was reminded today that I did not mention when I was talking about health the role of exercise. Excuse me, I just get off the question for a second. Exercise is critical to good health. It's as critical as good food. Your cells are living things. They have functions. They have things that they do. They move chemicals around. They move water and salt and minerals and everything. They transport. They do all kinds of things. They're very busy little things, and they have to function and do all these things. If you don't exercise, you don't let them work. You don't do the things that make all those cells do what they do. And if you don't let them do what they do, eventually they can't do what they do because they've sat unused. And basically your body starts to I shouldn't say die, starts to decompose, it starts to become dysfunctional. So the lack of exercise, if you just sit around like a couch potato all the time, your cellular self, your body, doesn't know you're alive anymore. Doesn't know that you need energy, you need all this kind of stuff, and it kind of loses its capacity to do that. So you need to exercise just to let your cells know that you're alive and vigorous and want energy, need it. So that's the role of exercise. Yes, exercise will build stronger muscles and give you better endurance, but that's a byproduct. What it mostly does is it tells the rest of your cells that you're alive and well and need support. You need them to work. So it is a use it or lose it. But it's not just use or lose your muscle tone. It's use or lose your general physical resilience, your immune system. All of that stuff just kind of deteriorates. It's like it's a piece of metal that just starts to rust. It doesn't work anymore very well. So the exercise is what tells your body that it's still alive and needs to work. It needs to be vigorous. It needs to protect itself. The foods you eat, the thoughts you think, the attitudes you have, and the exercise you get will determine the health that you have. Physically, that will modify your health. Did I answer your question about all that? Yeah. Okay, so there is some correlation between them, but not necessarily a one-to-one.
Are there times when it is often to is it interfering with someone else's growth? For instance, taking an addict to a clinic or taking a teenager for a depression program. Do you believe in psychiatric medicines for depression, for instance?
Well, no, it's not necessarily interference to try to help somebody. It is interference to force your help on somebody, if that person is an adult. If it's a child, you can force your help on your child because you're in charge of that child. You think your child's ill and needs to see a doctor, you don't ask the child whether or not he wants to see a doctor. You take him and they see the doctor. But now if it's your next door neighbor, you probably ask them if they want to see the doctor, and if they say no, even though they really need to see a the doctor, you respect that and let it be. So you don't force yourself on others, but sure, you go to your neighbor and say, would you like me to drive you to the doctor because maybe you're old or maybe you can't drive or maybe whatever? Would you like me to watch your children while you go see a doctor? So you can help people, but you shouldn't force people to do things. That's kind of I guess that's fundamental. You're not, and if you're healing, you don't force people to be healed either. We talked about that. Do I believe in? What was that?
¿Qué fue esa última parte?
See, it's getting late, right?
Como verán, ya es un poco tarde, ¿no?
What was the last? Do I believe in what?
La última parte, que si creo en qué.
No, psychiatric medicine. Yeah. Do I believe in psychiatric medicine? It's been shown that a good friend who knows how to listen can have about as good results as a psychiatrist in many situations. It depends on the individual. Sometimes the good friend just doesn't have the knowledge to do what a psychiatrist would do. But many times, just a good friend, sit and listen, is perfectly adequate. And this was a controlled study where they took psychiatric patients and one saw a psychiatrist, another just sat down and talked to somebody who was very empathetic and listened to them. And they found out the ones that just had somebody to talk to, that was empathetic, had just as much success. The therapy was just as good for them. Okay. So in many cases, a psychiatrist may not help you. They may just be structuring your problem into certain kinds of pigeonholes, and if they're the kind of psychiatrist that instead of really listening, they mostly prescribe drugs, that may not be helpful to you, or it may be helpful to you. Maybe it's a drug you need to help you restore brain chemistry and balance. So it's kind of hard to say, do I believe in it? No, I don't believe in it. But does it sometimes help? Yes, it sometimes helps. Does it sometimes hurt? Yes, it sometimes hurts. Doesn't help. Okay. Is it likely that just some kind of empathetic listener is really all that you need? You just need to kind of get it out and have somebody to talk to with a little common sense. Sometimes that's all you need. But if you don't happen to have a friend like that, well, you can hire one in a psychiatrist's office. But you'll pay a lot for that. So psychiatrists can be, and I'm sure there are good psychiatrists, and there are bad psychiatrists. There's ones you'd want to go to that would be helpful, and there's those that wouldn't. Some 20 years ago or so, I read a statistic that said one of the highest, on the top 3 or 4 highest levels of suicide by profession was psychiatrists. And I think the reason for that is after a while they begin to doubt that they're really doing anything important, and they become very depressed. It's like, am I really having an effect here? Is anything happening? Because basically, like I said, you can't work at a gut level or at a fundamental level problem at the being level intellectually. It's not an intellectual problem. If we could just tell somebody that's phobic, oh, don't be afraid of spiders, they won't hurt you. If you're afraid of spiders, that doesn't help. That's intellectual, and your problem is not an intellectual problem. So just the talking cure, as Freud called it, generally doesn't do much and lets you have an intellectual problem. An intellectual problem means you're missing information, or you have bad information. But other than that, an intellectual conversation isn't going to fix a fundamental issue. And if you have a psychiatrist that understands that, then he'll probably interact with you more on a fundamental level than he will on an intellectual level. And there it might help you. So sure, psychiatrists can do good things, but they also can cost a lot and not be much more effective than your next door neighbor.
Do you have any advice in order to be able to set ourselves free of an addiction, for instance, like a cigarette, without so much anxiety? Can we use the principle of healing with intention on ourselves, or is it better to have somebody else heal us?
Yes, you can affect addictions, and you can work on yourself and help that addiction along. You can work on yourself if you can remain detached from your ego. As long as you are detached, you can work as well on yourself as you can on somebody else. But a lot of people can't work on themselves very well because they're so emotionally, connected to themselves. The result matters to them. And if the result matters to you, you're not detached. You're connected to an outcome. You're connected to an outcome, it's not going to work as well. So you need just to do it and let it be how it is. On somebody else, that's easier than it is on yourself. But you can learn how to work on yourself. If you have an addiction like smoking, I've found that the biggest thing, the biggest variable there is how much do you really want to do it. If you try to quit smoking or quit eating sugar or any of the other things like that because you think you should, you'll probably never succeed. Because that's an intellectual process. If you at the being level say, I need to stop this. This is just insane. Sucking smoke down into my lungs because I'm addicted to it, and it's such an annoying habit to everybody else, and it's bad for my health. There's nothing really good about it other than I'm an addict, and it makes me feel better when I do it. That's ridiculous. I'm not going to do this anymore. If you have that kind of a being level conviction, usually it's easy. People who smoke for 20 years just walk away from it and don't have pangs of, I really want a cigarette, because they are committed at a deep level. And I think that's like that with anything. But most of us approach it from an intellectual level. I should do this. I should quit smoking. None of my friends like it. I really need to quit. But that's not a conviction at the being level. That's a desire. That's a wish. That's wishful thinking at the intellectual level, and that generally doesn't work. Now you have all the withdrawal symptoms, and they're painful, and it's terrible, and you really need a cigarette after dinner, and you have all this desire, and typically you'll give into it, and you'll be right back at it. So the biggest thing about getting over an addiction is to be honestly committed at a deep level to doing it. And there's no thought in your mind that you won't do it or that it'll fail. You will do it. You're just that committed to it. And the withdrawals will be very minor. Most of us don't approach it that way.
Pero la mayoría de nosotros no lo vemos así realmente.
Okay.
The last question. What would you like or would make you satisfied after this workshop? What would make you satisfied after this workshop or in this workshop?
What I really desire, what I really want, what makes me happy about these workshops is that people find something of value that they can use. That somebody comes up and says, wow, this was really neat. I'm going to change the way I'm doing things. Or I really learned a lot of very important stuff. If I get that kind of feedback, then it's worth all the trouble that it's been. That's why I'm here, so that you have that reaction. So if I'm here and I do this whole thing and everybody says, thank you very much, goodbye, then it's kind of, oh, I really did a bad job. They didn't get it at all. But when I get a response that says, I did get it, and it's important to me, then that's why I'm here, is so I can help you get it, give you information that you can use. And that's all I'm doing. I'm just giving you information that you have to use. I'm not fixing you at all. I'm not doing anything to change you or fix you. I'm just giving you information that hopefully will let you make different decisions and change your own life. That's my reward. That's my pay. Is what I get, and it's the same for all the things I do. You know, what makes it worth it for my time in trouble is when I get an email and somebody says, "Thank you, thank you, thank you. This changed my life. My relationship is different. You know, everything's different in my life." And I feel good about that because I've helped somebody. I've been of use to them. That's what pleases me. I think that the story that I bring and the fact that it pulls so much stuff together is something that we need. I think it will be healing and helpful in general. And for that reason, I'd like to make it available to everyone. So it would be wonderful if all of these events could be free. And they could be held someplace where 200 people could go and there would be no charge. I would like that, but of course somebody has to pay the bills, right? There's a venue and you have to pay for that, and there's the food back there and you pay for that, and there's a sound system, and the people are going to do the video and they have to pay for that, and there's all that sort of thing going on. And it can't be, but I like it to be. And so far, the way it's worked is all the people who've helped me put these together are all lovely, wonderful people who do it because they want to. They think it'll be helpful to others. That's why they do it. They put a lot of time in it. They put a lot of effort in it. They worry over it. I'm going to obligate myself for all this expense and rent this thing, and I can't back out. I'm going to buy airfare. I'm going to do all this. And what if only 10 people show up and I'm stuck with all the bills? That's a lot. That's a lot of risk to take. But they do it because they think it'll be helpful to people. That's why. So it always works that way. They charge just as little as they can charge to just cover the expenses. Nobody's trying to make a killing. Oh, you know, we got Tom Campbell here. We sell tickets and make a lot of money. Nobody thinks that. That wouldn't be even a rational thought. But it's nice because we meet people, we meet beautiful people, we make friends. You know, the people that come to these events are people who are ready. They're people who are seeking. If you're not, you wouldn't be here. If somebody said, "Hey, this guy's going to talk, you know, about the nature of reality, you know, about his book, My Big Toe. It's all about, you know, metaphysics and physics. Would you like to come?" You know, most people say, "What? How much are you going to pay me to sit through that? He's going to talk for how many hours about that?" See, not many people will buy that. That's why nobody's going to make much profit on having me come and talk, because the only people who come are the people who are seeking and interested, and that's a minority. But as you learn, you'll go out and interface with other people, and even if you never tell them anything, they'll see that you're different. They'll see that, you know, there was something good there. Maybe it'll spark a little interest, and all of that together will eventually make a difference. And the whole idea is that when we get to this second step, where the high priests of science say, "Yea, verily, this is a virtual reality, and it's created elsewhere that's non-physical, from something we don't know, something of which we're just a subset." Well, all hell's going to break loose at that point, and I'm hoping that there'll be enough people who have an inclusive, love-based idea of the nature of reality that we don't have to go back through the religious wars, you know, of the Dark Ages. We don't get back into that. We say, "Hey, there's a better solution to that, you know, that works better." So I like to talk. I don't charge because that's not the point. The point is to share. And the more we can share, the better it is, the more people. And we're not trying to get people to believe something. We're not selling anything. We're just offering the information. Take it, do what you want with it. That's the idea. So it pleases me to no end just to be able to be here. That Diana and the other people that helped her could put this together and enable you and I to get together and have this interchange. The questions were wonderful. You know, I've talked with you at lunch and on breaks and things, and all of it was just nice. I'm very happy to be here. It's been a lot of fun for me because you guys are all a lot of fun. Because you're paying attention, you like it, you think it's interesting, and you're learning, and you're taking it in. I couldn't ask for more than that. That's as much as I could hope for. So I'm real pleased. What makes me happy is you guys being happy. If you're happy, then I'm delighted.
Entonces yo estoy más que complacido.